Letter 17. My dear Father, when on the morning of the Passover it was noised abroad that the prophet of Galilee was entering the city by the gate of Jericho, the whole city was stirred, and from houses and shops poured forth crowds which turned their steps in that direction. Mary and I went upon the housetop, hoping to see something, but far and near was visible only a sea of heads, from which a deep murmuring arose, like the ceaseless voice of the ocean chafing upon a rocky shore. The top of the gateway was visible from the place where we stood, but it was black with the people who had crowded upon it to look down. There was heard at length an immense shout, as of one voice, which was followed by a swaying and onward pressure of the crowds. "The prophet must have entered the gate," said my cousin Mary breathlessly. "How they do him honor! It is the reception of a king." We were in hopes he would pass by our house, as we were on one of the chief thoroughfares, but were disappointed as he ascended the hill of Moriah to the temple. A part of the ascent to the house of the Lord is visible from her roof, and we had the satisfaction of seeing the prophet at a distance. We knew him only because he was in advance. The nighest one to him, Mary said, was her cousin John, though at that distance I could not have recognized him. The head of the multitude disappeared beneath the arch of the temple, and thousands upon thousands followed after, and in the rear rode the young Roman centurion, whom I have before spoken of, at the head of 400 horse to keep order in the vast mass. Mary could not recognize him, saying it was too far to tell who he was, but I knew him not only by his air and bearing, but by the scarlet pennon that fluttered from his iron lance, and which I had bestowed upon him, for he told me he had lost one his fair Roman sister Tullia had given to him, and as he so much regretted its loss, I supplied its place by another worked by my own hands. The multitude, as many as could gain admission, having entered the great gate of the temple, for a few minutes there was a profound stillness. Mary said, "He is worshipping or sacrificing now." "Perhaps," I said, "he is addressing the people and they listen to his words." While I was speaking, there arose from the bosom of the temple a loud, irregular, strange outcry of 1,000 voices, pitched to high excitement. The people without the gate responded by a universal shout, and then we beheld those nighest the walls retreat down the hillside in terrified confusion, while to increase the tumult, the Roman horse charged up the hill, seeking to penetrate the masses to reach the gate out of which the people poured like a living and tempest-tossed river, before which the head of the cohort recoiled or was overwhelmed and downtrodden. I held my breath in dreadful suspense, not knowing the cause of the fearful scene we beheld, nor to what it might lead. Mary sank almost insensible by my side. A quarter of an hour had not passed when young Samuel ben Azel, who had the day before come up from Nain to the Passover with his mother, entered and explained to us the cause of the scene I had witnessed. The prophet Jesus, having entered into the temple, found all the courts filled with merchants, changers of money, and sellers of cattle to the sacrificers. Portions of the sacred place were divided off by fences, in which hundreds of sheep and cattle were stalled. On his way to the inner temple, the prophet found his path so obstructed by the stalls and the tables of the brokers that he had to go around them and often to turn back and take a less hedged-up avenue. At length, finding upon the very lintel of the court of the priests a priest himself engaged at a table as a money-changer, and near him a Levite keeping a stall for selling doves and sparrows to the worshippers, he stopped upon the step, and turning round, cast his eye, which now beamed with an awful majesty and power, over the scene of noisy commerce and bartering. Every face was turned towards him in expectation. The half-completed bargain was suspended, and buyer and seller directed their gaze, as by a sort of fascination, not unmingled with a strange fear and awe, upon him. Those who had crowded about him drew back farther and farther, slowly but irresistibly widening the space between them and him, they know not by what impulse, till he stood alone, save near him remained John his disciple. The uproar of the buying and selling suddenly subsided, and the loud lowing of the cattle and the bleating of the sheep stopped, as if a supernatural awe had seized even the brute creation at his presence, and only the soft cooing of doves stirred the vast, death-like stillness of the place. A moment before a scene of oaths, cries, shouts, of running to and fro, buying and selling, the ringing of money, and the buzz of 10,000 voices. It was as if a hurricane, sweeping with deafening uproar of the elements over the lashed ocean, had been suddenly arrested and followed by a great calm. The silence was dreadful. It stopped the very beating of my heart. Every eye of the vast multitude seemed to fasten itself on the prophet in expectation of some dread event. The step of the temple upon which he stood seemed to be a throne, and the people before him expecting judgment. Suddenly the silence was broken by a young man near me, who gave a piercing shriek and fell insensible upon the marble floor. There was a general thrill of horror, yet the same awful stillness succeeded this startling interruption. That one intense shriek had spoken for us all. Suddenly the voice of the prophet was heard, clear, authoritative, and ringing like the trumpet that shook Sinai when the law was given. "It is written, 'My Father's house shall be called a house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves.'" He then picked up from the pavement at his feet a small cord which someone had thrown down, and doubling it in the form of a scourge, he advanced. Before his presence fled the changers of money, priests and Levites, sellers of oxen, sellers of sheep, sellers of doves, leaving their property to its fate. "Take these things hence," cried the prophet. "Make not my Father's house a house of merchandise." Such a scene of confusion and flight was never witnessed as now followed. In the moment of panic, I was borne along with the current. Money tables were overturned on all sides, but not the most avaricious one present thought at that moment of stopping to gather any of the gold and silver which the rushing thousands trampled beneath their feet. It was not the whip of small cords before which we fled, for he touched no man therewith, but it was from the majesty of his countenance. To the eyes of all, the little whip seemed to blaze and flash above their heads, as if it were the fiery sword of a destroying angel. In a few moments, the priest's court of the temple was cleared of every soul as we fled towards the south gate. On looking back, I saw that the prophet pursued not, but stood alone, master and lord of the temple. The whip was no longer in his hand, and his whole attitude and expression of face seemed changed from their late impress to an air of the profoundest compassion as he looked after us, still flying from his presence. My uncle, Rabbi Amos, who on his return from the temple corroborated what Samuel had stated, added that as Jesus stood alone, possessor of the gold-strewn floors of the courts of the temple, the high priest advanced towards him, and with awe, not unmixed with anger, demanded of him by what authority he did these things. His answer was, "My Father's house must not be made a house of merchandise." "Art thou the Christ?" asked the high priest, still standing some distance off from him. "If I tell thee that I am, ye will not believe." "What sign showest thou that thou art sent, and hast authority to do what thou doest here today within the temple?" "Hast thou not had proof of my power from heaven?" answered Jesus, stretching forth his hand towards the still terror-stricken multitude, and then laying it upon his breast, he added, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Be this to you, O priest, and to all Judea, the sign that I am sent by my Father who is in heaven. As he hath given me commandment, so I do." At this there was a great murmuring, said Rabbi Amos, for many of the priests, with Annas also, had got boldness and drawn near to hear. "He cannot be just a man," said Annas, "nor doth he honor God if he would have us destroy the temple." "Yet if he be not sent of God, whence hath he this power over men?" answered another. "He doeth this by Beelzebub, whose prophet he doubtless is," said Annas in a loud tone. "For a true prophet would not seek the destruction of God's holy house." Thereupon there was a multitude of voices, some crying one thing and some another. Caiaphas at length obtained silence and said to him with awe, "Art thou that Christ of the prophets?" "I am," calmly and firmly answered the prophet, and raising his eyes to heaven he added impressively, "I am come down from God." When, adds my uncle, Annas heard this, he lifted up his voice in an exclamation of horror and cried out, "Hear this blasphemer! Let us cast him forth from the temple which he pollutes." But no man dared approach the prophet. "Bear witness," then said he, sorrowfully rather than in anger, "that I have come unto my own, and ye have received me not. This temple of my Father, from which you would drive me forth, shall no longer be the dwelling place and altar of Jehovah. The day cometh when your priesthood shall be taken away and given to others, And among the Gentiles shall arise my Father's name, on every hill and in every valley of the earth, holy temples, wherein he shall delight to dwell. And men shall no longer need to worship God in Zion, but in all places shall prayer and praise be offered to the Most High. This temple which ye have polluted shall be overthrown, and ye shall be scattered among the nations." Thus speaking, the prophet quitted the temple, leaving the high priest and priests and Levites standing gazing after him without power to utter a word. Such, my dear father, is the account given by Rabbi Amos of what passed in the temple. That Jesus is the Christ is now beyond question, for he has openly acknowledged it to the high priest. Adieu, dearest father. The servants are bringing in boughs for the booths, and I must close this letter with prayers to our Father's God for your peace and welfare. ADINA.